Niagara Falls has always drawn the fearless, the desperate, and the curious. Its roaring waters call to those seeking glory, or escape. Some arrive by accident, others by choice, but a few go further than anyone should. These are the most haunting stories the falls will never forget. Each one a life teetering on the edge, and a reminder of the price of daring fate. At number 1 is the chilling story of Charles Stevens, the man locals called the Demon Barber of Bristol. But by the end of this story you'll understand how he went from cutting hair to chasing immortality at Niagara Falls, and how that decision ended in one of the most horrifying deaths the falls have ever witnessed. It was July 11, 1920, and Charles Stevens woke up knowing that today would decide everything: his reputation, his legacy, and the future of his 11 children. Fame wasn't a luxury for him, it was a necessity. Barbershop earnings couldn't feed a family that size, and he believed a single death-defying stunt could change their lives forever. There was only one problem: Stevens wasn't a trained daredevil. He wasn't an engineer. And he didn't actually understand what he was about to fight: the raw, unforgiving physics of Niagara Falls. Still, he built his barrel, long, narrow, reinforced with iron hoops, and convinced himself it was enough. But deep down, even Stevens knew he needed extra stability. So he did something no daredevil before him had ever attempted. He strapped a 200-pound anvil to his feet. He believed the weight would keep the barrel upright during the fall. But physics doesn't care about confidence. And this decision would seal his fate. As he climbed inside the barrel, local daredevils begged him not to go. The legendary Bobby Leach, who had survived the same stunt years earlier, inspected Stevens' barrel and told him plainly, "This will kill you." But Stevens refused to back down. With his children watching from a distance and the crowd gathering along the riverbank, he ordered the men helping him to push the barrel into the rushing current. The river grabbed it instantly. Within seconds, the barrel was spinning violently, pulled faster and faster toward the brink. And as the crowd held their breath, the barrel vanished over Horseshoe Falls, dropping more than 160 feet into roaring chaos. Then came the silence. And then, something worse. When rescuers found the remains downstream, the barrel was shredded, torn apart like tissue paper. The anvil, still strapped to what was left of Stevens' leg, had ripped straight through the bottom of the barrel, pulling him out of it mid-fall. The river kept his body. Only his right arm was ever recovered. And that's how Charles Stevens, the Demon Barber of Bristol, became the first and only man in history to go over Niagara Falls with an anvil strapped to his feet. A stunt meant to secure his family's future ended with nothing left of him but an arm. But if you think that was tragic, wait until you hear what happened to the man who spent 10 years writing a single book, built a 2,000-pound barrel, survived the fall, and still ended up dead because help didn't arrive in time. If you're enjoying the story so far, make sure to subscribe and drop a like. It really helps us create more of these incredible, shocking tales. You don't want to miss what comes next. At number 2 is the haunting story of George A. Stathakis, the humble Greek immigrant who believed destiny could be earned, even if it meant facing the deadliest waterfall on earth. But by the end of this story you'll understand how a man who survived war, poverty, and heartbreak spent 10 years writing a single book, only to die trapped inside a 2,000-pound barrel while rescue teams stood just feet away. It was the morning of July 4, 1930. The sun was bright, the mist rising like drifting ghosts over the Niagara River. Thousands lined the banks, whispering about the strange barrel waiting at the water's edge, a towering wooden and steel capsule built to withstand the impossible. And in its shadow stood George Stathakis, 46 years old, a chef by trade, a dreamer by nature, a man who had lost his wife, lost his home, and poured what remained of his heart into a manuscript he believed would outlive him. But George wanted something more, something bold enough to make the world remember his name. He wanted to survive a plunge over Niagara Falls. He spent years preparing, crafting a barrel unlike anything the river had ever seen, thick wooden planks, steel reinforcements, nearly a ton in weight. And tucked inside with him was Sonny Boy, his small pet turtle, his companion, and his good luck charm. When people asked why he would risk his life after spending a decade writing a book, George gave the same answer every time: some destinies require danger. As the crowds murmured, George climbed into the barrel. The hatch slammed shut. Ropes tightened. The river snarled beneath him. And with a final heave, the barrel slipped into the rapids. At first it seemed promising. The barrel rocked, spun, slammed against waves, but it held steady. Sonny Boy clung to the interior, silent and unshaken. Each violent jolt brought George closer to the edge he had dreamed about for years. Then came the plunge. A thunderous drop. A violent impact. And miraculously, George survived it. For a moment, hope was alive. But the river had other plans. The current dragged the massive barrel underwater, wedging it deep inside a hidden pocket of jagged rocks behind Horseshoe Falls. George wasn't crushed. He wasn't drowned. He was trapped. Alive. With no air. Hours passed. Then more hours. Rescuers tried everything: ropes, hooks, poles, boats, but the river refused to let the barrel go. All they could do was watch and pray. Inside, George had only darkness, heat, and the sound of water pounding the steel above his head. He may have spoken to Sonny Boy. He may have begged for breath. He may have been confident help would arrive. But time ran out. After 18 long hours, the river finally loosened its grip. Rescuers tore the barrel open, and discovered George had suffocated just minutes before they reached him. Sonny Boy survived. The manuscript, the book George believed would define his legacy, was never published. And the world was left with one of the cruelest ironies in Niagara's history: a man who survived the fall, but died waiting for rescue. If you were trapped in that dark, airless capsule, would you have held on to hope like George? Or would panic have swallowed you whole? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because if you think this was tragic, wait until you hear about the daredevil who believed he could outsmart the river with nothing but rubber inner tubes, and ended up sparking one of the most explosive deaths ever seen at Niagara Falls. At number 3 is the tragic fall of William Red Hill Jr., the son of Niagara's greatest hero. But by the end of this story, you'll understand how a man born into a legacy of courage stepped into the river on a homemade raft, and triggered one of the most violent endings ever witnessed at Niagara Falls. It was August 5, 1951, a scorching summer morning on the Niagara River. The air vibrated with a mix of excitement and dread. Thousands lined the riverbanks, newspapers advertised the stunt in bold headlines, and vendors sold food as though it were a festival. But beneath the cheers was something darker, an unease no one could shake. And at the center of it all stood William Red Hill Jr. Not a stranger. Not a reckless nobody. But the son of a legend, William Red Hill Sr., the most celebrated riverman in Niagara's history. A man who had rescued strangers from whirlpools, navigated deadly waters, and recovered the lost bodies of daredevils who never made it home. Red Hill Sr. was the river's guardian. Red Hill Jr. grew up trying to live up to the myth. But fame didn't bring fortune. The Hill family was drowning in debt. Respect couldn't buy food. Heroism couldn't save their home. And in that desperation, Red Jr. decided he would reclaim the family's honor with a stunt bold enough to restore the Hill name. A stunt even seasoned daredevils warned him never to attempt. Niagara will kill you, they said. But Red Jr. wasn't afraid. The river felt like family, like destiny. It had protected his father for decades. Surely, it would protect him too. 4 months, he built a contraption he called the Thing. A raft made of 13 giant inner tubes tied together with ropes, cables, and wooden planks. No steel. No casing. No safety measures. Just rubber, rope, and hope. Engineers laughed. Friends begged him to stop. His father pleaded with him. But Red Jr. was determined. On that August morning, he walked to the riverbank with a smile for the cheering crowd, but those who knew him saw something else. A quiet seriousness. A heavy acceptance. As though he sensed the river had already made its decision. He strapped himself to the Thing. Climbed aboard. Took one final look toward shore. And pushed off. The crowd erupted as the raft drifted into the white water, but the excitement lasted only seconds. The moment the rapids seized the Thing, destruction began. The raft slammed sideways, violently twisting. Inner tubes buckled. Ropes stretched to their limits. Spray blinded him. The river wasn't carrying him, it was tearing his creation apart. One tube tore loose. Then another. Then another. The Thing was dying, and Red Jr. knew it. He clung desperately to the collapsing remains as the Horseshoe Falls pulled him forward. Merciless, inevitable. Seconds from the edge, the entire raft exploded apart. Tubes ripped away. Wood shattered. Ropes snapped like hair. Red Jr. was left exposed. No protection, no flotation, no chance. He was swept over the falls. Witnesses said the plunge was one of the most violent they had ever seen. By the time rescuers reached the base, all they found was scattered debris and the roaring white water. Moments later, Red Jr. surfaced, unconscious, face down. By the time help reached him, he was gone. The river had claimed the son of its greatest champion. The aftermath was immediate and explosive. Crowds fell silent. Newspapers screamed in horror. Officials demanded change. Within weeks, Niagara Falls issued strict bans on stunts, effectively ending the daredevil era forever. The Hill family lost more than a son, they lost their final hope of escaping poverty. And Red Hill Sr., the man who had survived the river 100 times, was forced to bury the child it took from him. Today William Red Hill Jr. is remembered not for triumph, but for the warning his death carved into history, the day Niagara Falls stopped being a stage, and reminded the world of its power. If you were Red Hill Jr., buried in debt and living in the shadow of a legendary father, would you have risked everything for one chance at glory? Or was his fate sealed the moment he pushed off into the river? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you thought this was intense, wait until you hear about the daredevil who walked across Niagara on a tightrope, only to meet a mysterious and chilling death days later. At number 4, we step back in time to August 15, 1887, a night that would echo through Niagara history. The river roared like a living beast beneath the moonlight, mist curling into the sky like ghostly fingers. Above the churning gorge, a young man prepared to risk everything, not for fame, not for fortune, but to prove he could conquer what others could not. His name was Stephen Pear. Pear wasn't born into wealth or fame. He wasn't a performer or a professional daredevil. He was a hotel worker in Ontario, Canada, an ordinary young man captivated by the extraordinary. Every day he stared at the tightrope strung high across the Niagara Gorge from his window, watching other daredevils attempt the impossible. And in his mind he believed he could do it better. On August 12th, after years of secret practice, Pear took his first walk across the gorge. He succeeded. Spectators gasped. He became an instant local hero. But with success came obsession. Triumph made him believe he was untouchable. Not the height. Not the wind. Not the thundering river below. Nothing could stop him, or so he thought. By August 15th, whispers of sabotage reached him. Rumors of cut marks, loose knots, and jealous rivals surrounded him. But Stephen ignored them. He believed the rope, the wind, and the river would obey him. As midnight fell, the fog thickened. The mist from the falls slicked the rope, the moon barely cutting through the haze. Pear approached the tightrope alone. Each step onto the wire was a heartbeat in the dark, a defiance of gravity, a battle with nature, and a test of every skill he had painstakingly honed. One foot, then another. The wire trembled. The gorge below churned like a living beast. Mist soaked his boots. The wire glistened, slick and treacherous. He steadied himself. Then came the sound that would haunt witnesses forever, a sharp twang. The wire snapped under strain. Stephen Pear plummeted into the dark void. Twisting, falling, the massive drop pulling him toward jagged rocks and the raging river. He struck the stones before ever reaching the water, his body breaking on impact. The next morning, police found him below the wire, skull fractured, clothes torn, hands bruised, as if he had tried desperately to grab the rope on the way down. Crowds gathered. Some cried. Others whispered. Newspapers erupted with theories. He slipped. He was drunk. Sabotage. Rivalry. No evidence confirmed any theory. No confession ever surfaced. Just a broken rope, a fallen hero, and a mystery that persists over 130 years later. Stephen Pear became the first, and only, Canadian to die attempting to cross Niagara on a tightrope. His daring, skill, and ambition ended not in triumph but tragedy. The gorge had claimed him. The legend of Niagara grew darker. If you were Stephen Pear, standing in the fog, feeling the wire tremble beneath your boots, would you have risked it all again? Or would fear have forced you back to solid ground? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And when you're ready for the next jaw-dropping tale, hold on tight, because the daredevil who launched himself over Niagara Falls on a jet ski, relying on a rocket-powered parachute, is about to test the limits of human ambition, and meet a fate that no one could have predicted. At number 5, we jump to a summer morning unlike any other, July 18, 2003. The roar of Niagara Falls thundered louder than usual, as if the river itself sensed what was coming. Spectators lined the banks, cameras ready, hearts pounding. High above the mist, a man prepared to make history, or meet disaster. His name was Robert Overacher, but everyone called him Rocket. Rocket wasn't a seasoned daredevil in the traditional sense. He was an extreme sports enthusiast, a thrill-seeker with a taste for the impossible. He had conquered waves, cliffs, and rivers, but Niagara Falls was a different beast. And on this day he planned something no one had attempted before, a jet ski launch over the Horseshoe Falls, equipped with a rocket-powered parachute. Friends and onlookers questioned his sanity. Engineers warned of catastrophic failure. But Rocket was undeterred. Fame, adrenaline, and the lure of doing the first ever drove him forward. He revved the jet ski, engine screaming, mist blinding his vision. Crowds fell silent as he sped toward the edge. Every second stretched into eternity. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum of doom. And then he hit the drop. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the impossible was possible. Rocket soared into the mist, suspended above the river in a perfect arc. Then the parachute deployed, imperfectly. Chaos. The chute tangled. The jet ski spun violently, out of control. Mist and spray whipped around him like a living wall. The river below roared, relentless and unforgiving. Seconds later, the jet ski and rocket plunged into the turbulent waters. Rescue crews sprang into action, but the currents were merciless. The river claimed the craft, dragging it into jagged rocks and furious rapids. When Rocket finally surfaced, battered and gasping, the parachute had failed to slow him enough. He was injured but alive. This stunt became a headline around the world, a terrifying mix of triumph and disaster, a warning that even the most calculated plans can be undone by nature. Rocket survived, but the lesson was clear. Niagara Falls does not forgive mistakes. If you were Robert Overacher, hurt, battered, yet alive, would you risk it all again? Or would the falls have finally taught you to respect their power? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And just when you think you've seen every kind of daredevil disaster, the next story takes us to a man who dared to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel not once but twice, and survived both times. What he did next will leave you speechless. Just when you think the falls have claimed every daring soul, enters a man whose story defies reason. Not one plunge but two, and he survived both. It was July 24, 1960. The river churned with relentless fury, mist curling high into the sky like smoke from an ancient battlefield. Crowds had gathered, eager for spectacle, their whispers carried off by the roar of Niagara. And there, preparing a massive barrel, stood a man whose name would remain shrouded in mystery. The first attempt had already earned him notoriety. Against all odds, he had survived the terrifying drop once before, a feat many called impossible. Yet he wasn't satisfied. Fame, adrenaline, and sheer defiance of danger fueled his ambition. He wanted to do it again, proving that survival was not luck but skill. The barrel was reinforced, yet still claustrophobic. He climbed in, alone, heart-pounding, muscles taut. The crowd hushed as the barrel touched the rapids, spinning violently under the grip of the Niagara current. As he approached the edge, time slowed. Seconds stretched into eternities. The roar of the falls grew deafening, the mist blinding, the river pulling him toward oblivion. Then he plunged. Impact. The barrel rolled and twisted, testing every ounce of its construction. Water surged around him, relentless and unforgiving. And then, miraculously, it held. He emerged, drenched, battered, but alive. The crowd erupted in astonishment. But even survival could not satisfy his obsession. Weeks later he returned. The river had not forgiven, and the danger had not diminished. He climbed into the barrel once more, this time with modifications, with lessons learned from the first plunge. Every spectator knew the stakes. Every heartbeat echoed with suspense. The second plunge was more violent, more chaotic. Rapids slammed the barrel, rocks threatened its integrity, and the roar of the river became almost unbearable. Yet again he survived. This anonymous daredevil became a legend, not for fame, not for wealth, but for pushing the limits of human courage and endurance. Twice he defied Niagara, twice he cheated death, and yet the falls remained a reminder that even the boldest are at nature's mercy. If you were in that barrel, spinning violently over the edge, would you have survived? Would you have dared to try it twice? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you thought that was the ultimate daredevil story, just wait, because next we're diving into the 6 worst Bermuda Triangle deaths ever caught on record, real cases. Cases so mysterious, so chilling, they'll make you question what's real and what's impossible. You do not want to miss this. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to uncover these terrifying stories before anyone else. The unknown is waiting, and it's closer than you think.